For nearly a century, the West was just another word for American interests, but that map is being redrawn. And for the first time in history, the West is leaving the United States behind.
This isn't just a theory anymore. While the White House spent this week issuing threats and warnings, the rest of the world's major powers decided to stop listening.
Fresh off Carney's landmark deal last week with Beijing, securing a commitment for visa-free travel for Canadians and unlocking nearly $3 billion in new export orders, the UK's Keir Starmer touched down in China to sign a strategic partnership, securing his own 30-day visa-free travel for Brits and a direct line to the world's second-largest economy.
The reaction from the Oval Office? Pure chaos. Trump warned that these deals were very dangerous and told Canada that if we keep talking to China, we won't be allowed to play ice hockey anymore.
It is a stunning look at the divide. One side of the border is talking about high-speed rail and global trade, while the other is threatening our national sport like it's a playground bully.
If you're waiting for the Western Alliance to return to normal, stop waiting. Normal has left the building. From London to Ottawa, the decision has been made. If the U.S. wants to retreat into isolation and trade wars, the rest of the West is going to move on without them.
So today, we're going to dig into the unthinkable, why Western allies have to start decentering the U.S., and why leaning into China, carefully, on our own terms, might actually be the grown-up move.
By the end of this, you'll see why Trump's oil and Greenland gambles, they broke the old Western deal, and how Mark Carney is leading the way to a new world order, while London and Ottawa are effectively forming a new coalition of the Pragmatic. And you'll understand why Mark Carney flying to Beijing isn't betrayal, it's self-defense.
So let's start with Trump's record as an ally. China has never threatened to annex Canadian territory. China hasn't slapped illegal tariffs on us because their president woke up in a bad mood. China hasn't floated taking Greenland, whether they like it or not, and dared NATO to stop them. The country doing all of that is our neighbor to the south.
We are told constantly that we share values with the United States. But look at the actions of the last year. First, Venezuela. This country has the world's largest oil reserves. So instead of diplomacy, Trump sent in the military, captured Maduro, called it liberation, and then immediately pivoted to investment opportunities for U.S. oil executives.
That wasn't foreign policy, that was a heist. And the result? Well, Venezuelan oil that used to head to China and other buyers suddenly flows through U.S. refineries. Reuters is now writing about Trump's fossil fuel gamble, noting that while he's grabbing oil resources like it's 1920, he's actually ceding the entire future energy market to Beijing.
Then he revives the Greenland fantasy again. This time it's explicit though. Greenland is vital. Denmark can't defend it, and the US has to own it to stop Russia and China. He talks about taking it the nice way or the more difficult way.
Denmark and Greenland say no. Europe backs them. NATO people quietly freak out because an American move on Greenland would be the first time the alliance's so-called protector tries to carve up an ally's territory. It fundamentally breaks the trust that holds the whole West together.
Then look at his domestic record. Minnesota is in chaos. Thousands of people swept up in ICE operations, mass arrests, deportations without trial, U.S. citizens murdered. And don't forget the Epstein files. They are scathing and running rampant on the internet right now.
And then you add in the media. Everyone says China has no freedom of speech, but let's look at the U.S. Journalists are being arrested for covering the news. Huge chunks of U.S. outlets owned by a handful of corporations are controlling the narrative. And you have a president who openly calls the press the enemy, threatens universities, fires civil servants, and talks about sending troops into states that didn't vote for him.
And on top of that, the nagging suspicion that Trump is compromised by Russia. Because, honestly, his decisions, they just keep lining up with what Putin wants. And that brings us to the simple question for the rest of us. Why on earth would any Western ally hang their entire future on this guy?
But the biggest reason the West needs to pivot isn't just about politics. It's about the future economy. Trump is betting the entire American farm on oil and gas. He's seizing Venezuela's fields, drilling in the Arctic, and slashing regulations.
Meanwhile, China has quietly become the world's electric vehicle and battery factory. Around 70% of global EV production is Chinese. They are building solar, wind, and grid upgrades at insane rates.
And think about what that means for Canada or Europe. If we tie our economy to the US, we're tying ourselves to a dying technology. We are betting on 19th century energy. If we partner with China, on the other hand, we're plugging into the supply chain that will power the 21st century.
And it's not just energy, it's infrastructure. China has the largest high-speed rail network on the planet, over 50,000 kilometers of track. And we aren't just reading this off a spec sheet. We have actually done this train ride. We took the high-speed rails from Beijing to Shanghai and Shanghai to Kunming and everywhere in between.
And you know what? It was awesome. You're moving at 300 kilometers an hour, it's silent, it's smooth, and you can literally balance a coin on the windowsill. What you realize very quickly is this is what modern actually looks like.
And listen, we've taken a lot of road trips through the USA, and the one thing we notice is American infrastructure is crumbling. In China, you tap a card, you get on a spotless train, and you arrive on time. What a concept.
Sure, their system is centralized and heavy-handed. But when they decide to build a massive wind farm, it gets built. They don't have 5 years of litigation. If you're a country trying to build real stuff like clean tech and manufacturing, China is a partner that can actually deliver.
Compare that to the stability we're getting from the US right now. Well, Trump is threatening a 50% tariff on any and all Canadian aircraft sold in the US. He's specifically targeting Bombardier. He's even threatening to decertify the Global Express and every other plane made in Canada.
And why? Because he's mad as that Transport Canada has a fast-track certification for Gulfstream jets. He's effectively holding the entire North American aviation industry hostage, threatening jobs of 3,000 Bombardier workers in the US and thousands more here in Quebec, just to win a regulatory spat. That is not partnership. It's economic arson.
And let's narrow this down just a bit more. We share the longest undefended border in the world with a neighbor that has, under Trump, threatened 100% tariffs on our goods and services. Now, a 50% surgical strike on our aerospace sector. He isn't just talking about steel and cars anymore. He's talking about decertifying our planes so they can't even fly in U.S. airspace.
He has openly talked about taking our lumber and water, and now he's treating Bombardier like a bargaining chip in a high-stakes game of chicken. He treats our sovereignty like it's his personal real estate, and he treats our most advanced industries like they're disposable.
We watched him seize Venezuelan oil, then pivot to Greenland. And that's not far from our Arctic backyard. When he talks about taking Greenland for security, he's really talking about controlling northern shipping lanes, things that matter deeply to Canada.
Meanwhile, China has done plenty that we have to challenge. Detentions, aggressive behavior in the South China Sea, but it has never threatened to annex Canadian territory. It hasn't run trade policy like a reality show feud either.
So let me ask you this. If you're Mark Carney or any Canadian strategist, and you're sitting in Ottawa with an enraged superpower on your doorstep, what do? Well, you get on a plane to Beijing and you start talking.
Listen, this isn't betrayal. This is insurance. You talk about diversifying exports so that when Trump slaps tariffs on your goods, you've got somewhere else to send them. You talk about joint projects on critical minerals so that you're not stuck between American fossil mania and Europe dithering.
You also talk about guardrails, though. But the key message is simple. Canada is not going to sit and wait while our one big customer loses the entire plot. We are diversifying because our survival depends on it.
Now, before you start typing angry comments, because we know that's coming, let's be real. We're not naive about who China is. We're not suggesting that we swap one master for another.
Yeah, we know what Beijing is capable of. Just ask Australia. When Australia asked for an investigation into the origins of COVID, China slapped massive punitive tariffs on their wine and barley overnight. They used trade as a weapon to punish political speech.
We know what is happening also in Japan and the Philippines. Their ships are being rammed and water cannoned in the South China Sea. China believes that it is the rightful hegemon of Asia, and it pushes its neighbors around. We are not blind to that.
So no, we are not completely safe in China. But here's the brutal reality of 2026. We are not safe with the USA either.
No, you got one superpower that uses trade tariffs to punish countries for COVID questions, and the other superpower uses trade tariffs because its president is in a bad mood on a Tuesday. One pushes ships around the South China Sea and threatens to take Taiwan, and the other is literally talking about taking Greenland to threaten a NATO ally.
So what does abandoning the US actually look like in practice? Well, it doesn't mean cutting all trade ties, but it doesn't mean cheering on China either.
It means Western allies stop treating Washington as the default option and start acting like independent adults. It means building trade deals that don't depend on whoever Trump yells at next. And it also means telling the US you don't get to seize oil fields and threaten Greenland and still assume that we'll line up behind you.
It means working with China where it makes sense, on infrastructure, on green tech, all while being clear on our red lines. It means working with India, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East.
The unthinkable isn't that allies would move away from the US. The unthinkable is that after everything we've seen, the oil grabs, the Greenland threats, the Minnesota crackdowns, that we'd still pretend that nothing has changed.
From where we sit here in Canada, the choice is simple. Our neighbor has gone off the rails. China hasn't threatened our borders. One superpower is acting like a partner in decline. The other is acting like an ambitious but stable counterweight.
And in that world, refusing to adjust isn't loyalty, it's negligence.
So let us know in the comments what you think. If you were running Canada, the UK, or the EU right now, would you deepen ties with China to protect yourself from the US? Or would you keep going all in with the USA?
And if you're watching from the States, does this feel unfair? Or does it feel like a conversation your own leaders forced the world to have?
So hit like if you want more uncomfortable questions just like that one and actual facts behind them.
And listen, talking about shifting alliances away from the US is not exactly advertiser friendly either. That's why we do need you. If you want to help keep this channel independent so that we can say things that others won't, please hit that join button and become a part of the A-Team.
You can also head over to Substack, and we'd love to hear all about what you're thinking is going on in the New World Order yourself.
Because whether we like it or not, the map is already changing. The only question is whether we change with it.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and we shall see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.